And we are live. Welcome back, everyone. And this on this Mothering Sunday, we have a stream where we're going to be, responding to a what I've been seeing among sort of neo-pagan, Nietzschean, even a few BAP following circles on the essence of Christianity in the late Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, and the effect it's had, as they see it, on west of European civilization going forward. And the ultimate accusation is that leading to modern day progressive woke, well, I guess what as they define as woke ideology. And we're going to do a sort of a deep dive into this, looking at it from the historical perspective to see if there's any validity in their claims. I'm joined with Cringe Walker, who goes by so many different names now I can't keep track. How are you? How are you?
Hello. Yes, I mean, I think I have a repertoire now at this point where I the first day I respond to someone, it's just making fun of them. The second day I get serious actual data, and the third day I stop caring. So that was my response to like a lot of the. I think you're talking about the Irish guy who is posting about Nietzschean philosophy and early Christianity, Uber Boyo.
Yeah, that's one. That's one of them. That was the first one, and then I've seen like a Hellenic, like some Hellenic.
Oh yeah, that guy's dumb. But anyway,
Yeah,
no, I shouldn't say that.
I've seen a few of them. I will say this though, I am pals with Survive the Jive, and I do follow his content, and um, I guess I think with Germanic paganism, there's a bit more meat there to for their side of the argument, but a lot of people still really have a close connection to Greco-Roman paganism, which is kind of odd because if you're
Yeah.
Northern European, you should really be more connected to that of a Germanic pantheon.
Yeah. I mean, there are those people that want to say it's. I mean, they're both Indo-European. They both come from the same ancestor worship of sorts. I've repeatedly said that given the names of these deities and their histories, that they're basically just deified sons of Noah. Like some of the titans in Greek mythology basically have the same names as the sons of Noah, like Apatis and Japheth. I'm saying them differently, but at a phonetic level, they're spelled the same way. I've been trying to work up research for Des Partar, like the Indo-European title for like the sky god. I'm pretty sure Des Petar comes from Ye Petar, another way of saying Japheth, but I'm not sure. So the sounds are similar, but the meanings of the words are not. So as an etymological study, it's not linked, but as a phonetical study, it is. If that makes
Mm.
sense. Sorry to be a massive nerd there, but I enjoy researching this. Um Jesus once said that uh you know I call you gods because you have the words of God. And this is often looked over and forgotten about, but like Jesus said, if you carry the words of God with you where you go, you become like unto a god. You're not actually God, but like you're of the image of God. You become the image of a god. And if you go back to Genesis 9:27, which is I often tell pagans to read Genesis 9 because Genesis 9 and Genesis 10 because it reveals that the most faithful sons of Noah that actually followed God's command to fill the earth and go out and fill the earth. They were the Indo-Europeans. They were the specifically Japheth and specifically his son Javan, often called Yavan, possibly related to Ion, the Greek ancestral lineage. But yeah, so because the sons of Japheth were the most faithful to God's word, they actually carried God's word to like go out into the world and fill it. In many ways, they are doing what Christ said. Like you've become like unto gods because you have obeyed God. And in this way, the ancient Indo-Europeans would not be incorrect to view their ancestors as like unto God, not gods actually, but like bearing a very good image of God because they were faithful to the call, to the command. And to this degree, when you're talking to neo-pagan, you can like kind of say, yeah, I mean, like because your ancestors were the most faithful, your ancestors were like unto a god. They are not actually gods to worship, but rather ancestors to look upon as being the most faithful. Basically, they were very faithful to the call to go out and fill the world, and it's testified for the fact that like, yeah, you find Indo-Europeans scattered from Asia to Europe and continually like into the imperial era continued to scatter throughout the world. And the gospel was most carried throughout the world by the Indo-Europeans in a continuing tradition of being the most faithful to God's command to go out and fill the world. So as an introduction, the pagan can be fortified in his enjoyment of his ancestors because they were the most faithful to God. But where they have departed is worshiping those ancestors as gods rather than looking at them as reflections of God. And that's really the point of like where my whole contention of pagans is that they want to go back to tradition, but they're not going far enough. They have to go further back to Noah, to seeing who their true God is. But yeah, sorry for getting a little off track there. I guess to my view of this whole argument that was happening on Twitter between, there is this attempt to take Nietzschean philosophy and give it a pagan skin suit, which is a bit weird. And there are many reasons why this is weird. First, I'll just say Uber Boyo is kind of playing the hatchling. You know A's term, the hatchling.
Yeah.
Where like
born like 20 seconds ago, sort of thing. Doesn't know.
Yeah, like it's so like when you open your Twitter comment as it's so weird that like the Christians were the woke movement. It's bizarre. And then you have a name like Uber Boyo clearly referencing that you've read Nietzsche. You're not fooling anyone. Like we all can tell the game you're playing. If you've even read a little bit of Nietzsche, it's very obvious what you're playing. And of course, later on into his thread, he just directly quotes Nietzsche. You're not shocked. You're not surprised. You're framing it that way because illiterates will look at that and think, "Oh, I'm discovering something new and spicy." No, you're not. It's a 200-year-old thought, and it's not a new idea.
I came across this. It was really interesting. It was a video that was going on around on. I think it was on Telegram, but it was also on Twitter, and I saw on both actually. On Twitter, I decided to actually sort of watch it and then sort of tweet it back out with comments. And it was this. It was a very odd one because it was St. Patrick's Day related, and it was this sort of ginger, white girl. Who was basically it was a she was saying, "Oh, don't you know Saint Patrick? Well, he's from Britain, and he wiped out all the ancient Druid texts and everything." And it was very much it was very much.
Finish your thought. Sorry.
And doing some digging, one of my followers found her. It was from TikTok, the video itself, and it was he found that she was not Irish because this is the thing, her accent was completely off. It was kind of like a piss poor imitation of an Irish accent from Americans. No offense, but that sort of imitation accent. So you hear the English accent of Americans, the all sort of attempted version of it all the time, and it's so you can tell it's an imitation. And she's based out of Los Angeles.
Oh, so the accent was fake?
It was fake. It was totally fake. It was totally fake. Yeah.
I mean, in typical American fashion, being ignorant of history, Druids didn't write books. They were a pure oral cult.
Exactly. This is what my
and if you think this is Christian propaganda, Caesar said this, and when he was touring Gaul and documenting the Druids, many people have recorded the fact, like pagan and Christian sources have recorded the fact the Druids were not they didn't want to write down their information. They wanted to keep it to themselves. I could go on a whole length about Druids, because Druids are older in Europe than Indo-European religions. They're an older, they're much older. As a matter of fact, Druidic beliefs show up in a lot of pagan, Indo-European pagan belief systems as the older gods, like the Titans or the I forget in Norse mythology who the older gods are. Like most Indo-European religions reference like this older set of gods that were conquered by the newer Indo-European gods, and this is like a retelling of a story of like, well, the ancient Celtic and those ancient Celtic belief systems were basically pushed aside for the Mediterranean and Germanic belief systems. And they lingered on a little bit in Ireland and northern Spain and Brittany and other places. But fundamentally, the beliefs of those people were unknown, and they wanted them to stay unknown because they did not want outsiders knowing their beliefs. There was a significant amount of interpretation of the stars, and quite a lot of there was probably a lot of astrological work in terms of like mega architecture, like at Stonehenge and elsewise. And there is some evidence that they could make pretty good prophecies through the stars of weather and famous people. And this isn't unbiblical. The Magi famously predicted Christ through astronomy, so it's not particularly like demonic or anything. I mean, if you can predict Christ, it's not demonic. So like whoever the Druids were, I'm happy to speculate that they were probably closer to Christian faith than the neo-pagans were. But they're such an ancient belief system, and they were so secretive that St. Patrick's didn't burn any books. They didn't have books to burn. They weren't willing to write down their belief systems. And in fact, if you want to look at St. Patrick's inheritor, St. Columb fancied the Druids in Iona, and he founded a school, a monastery in Iona, where he basically converted a few Druids, and he seems to have encouraged the Druids to maintain a large amount of their cultural practices, to such an extent that Rome did not like this. They were very angry that the Columb monks were still practicing forms of Druidic mysticism. The human sacrifice part was thrown out in exchange for the Eucharist, thank God. But other than that, the Druids of St. Columb basically became Christian Druids. They continued practicing forms of mysticism, arguably some forms of magic, because they put a curse on the island that should anyone come to attack it, they would find it difficult. Which is like, there's a whole like mythology around that. Sorry for going on a tangent, but so dumb fake Irish girl from LA, you are in fact a retard.
I mean, the fact because I live in a part of England which has a lot of I don't say Celtic mythology, I say ancient Britain mythology, because a lot of it dates back to before the Celtic civilization really even came to Gaul. There's a lot of stone. You got stones, not just stone circles, but mounds. Which are just pure mysteries. We don't. The thing is, I had this great discussion with Owain on it. I mean, Owain sort of goes, he's sort of in the sort of like Hyperborean sort of, it's like an ancient like Hyperborean city sort of thing. And I mean, I'm not fully on board with that, but whatever it was, whatever they were, if you ever, there's one particular out towards Glastonbury Tor, which I've climbed many times. If you travel out there, there's this really interesting point in the day where you have the moon, the sun, and it sort of sits equal in the sky. Mm-hmm. And it has this amazing twilight moment with the stars. And a lot of like your girls that have like crystals and star signs and everything will say, well, there's something spiritual that connects everything. But there is something, for me, there is something about within that does sort of hearken to a higher sort of transcendent order, like a spiritual hierarchy in my mind. And one thing that one thing that you and this is sort of universal. This is true in paganism and Christianity and the Indo all faiths dating back far, is that all have to subject themselves, um, or they in essence they are hierarchical in nature. I don't think you can really have a religion where there is no hierarchy in it, in their,
Yeah, to have a religion is to consider something more holy than another thing, which is to say hierarchy.
yeah, pretty much. There's nothing really beyond that. And I have noticed there are, and this is why I do separate, person like Survive the Jive. He understands that. Him and his people understand that, and they very much view it as a good thing, as it should be, because it is a good thing. 'Cause it sets oneself above just material, sort of the material. But there's also a strain in the neo-pagans today, and very much in this country as well, because again, because of the ancient sites and everything, you do see a lot of neo-pagan modern day druids, and I think,
in many ways, I respect them more because their religion isn't written down. It can be. It's not difficult for Druidism to become a kind of low church Christianity. In fact, that's what happened in many areas of the British Isles. Most of the early monks of Britain were just druids that liked Christ. They said, "Oh, there's a saying like Christ is my druid," from the early church in England. These aren't Anglo-Saxon beliefs. These are native Brittonic beliefs.
native Brittonic Celtic beliefs.
Yeah, and so like when the Anglo-Saxons came over, they had their own sort of understanding of these things, but the native British people, non-Anglos, they were very open to Christianity because, again, Druidism is at a fundamental level, and an appreciation of the divinity of patterns in nature, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and such a thing is completely compatible with Christ, because even the Bible says like the stars and planets and moons and star and sun were all given as signs for times, and you should respect them. And in many times the Old Testament, and I think in the New Testament, like the moon and sun are called as witness, as if they have an ability to record and remember what men do on the world. And God oftentimes calls the moon and earth and sun to bear witness to the sins of man and give testimony to them. And from a Druid perspective, this is all very compatible. And so for most Britons, like, there's a reason why Britain converted earlier, despite being further away from Jerusalem than the rest of continental Europe, right? Like most of continental Europe was a hodgepodge of Arian Christian heresy, Germanic paganism, and leftover bits and pieces of Hellenistic paganism. The last Greek pagans died out in like the year 1100 or something, like crazy late. And that was, and by then all of Britain had already been Christian for centuries. So like one of the reasons why Britain was very fast to convert, it started converting before Rome collapsed, which is kind of crazy. It's because the natives just viewed Christianity as a more formalized version of Druidism. And to this, anyway, it's just a funny little thing because like the more organized and written down religions, like classic Greek beliefs, were more resistant because they had fixed beliefs that were written down authoritatively, and so it took more time to like discuss and debate and prove and disprove. Whereas Druids were just like, this Jesus fellow is a really good Druid. I'm a Christian now.
I will say this though, because there is a sort of caveat that goes along with all of this, and I was reading Mark Morris on the history of the Anglo-Saxon people in England. It's a very good book actually, if you want, because it was released I think a few years ago, but it definitely had a very interesting passage on the Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons, and I guess one has to remember a lot, even then this would have been the same in the Roman Empire. At that point, it's quite hard to define. It wasn't so much an edict comes down from Theodosius, and okay, this town in somewhere in Greece or everything. Well, we're all Christian now. It really came down to in like a syncretic system where people would still maybe they would have baptism and they would embrace, because of the imperial edict, they would embrace the emperor's religion, but they would still entertain and worship whatever local deity came before.
Yeah, and that's not entirely abnormal. Over time, those deities were,
Yeah.
they were downgraded to just ancient heroes, or some, in some instances they were even turned into saints. There's at least one
Yeah.
saint of, I think it's Saint Bridget, where she used to be like a pagan god and then became a saint at some point.
I think Fortuna, the goddess Fortuna, became like a Christian saint as well, or something like that.
Yeah. So there are these
yeah.
curious little moments where, like, a pagan god is identified as an ancestral prophet of some sort, and so is downgraded from god to saint, and then respected as a receiver or progenitor of prayers rather than a god to be worshipped, which is interesting. You get into all kinds of interesting debates about that.
No, that's right. And so I mean, what the case, because I've actually been interested of you just mentioned, and the Hellenes in Greece. It was mainly outside, if I remember correctly. It was like in Corinth, out in the mountains around Corinth. You had
Around Sparta, actually.
Yeah, Sparta. Yeah, in these sort of isolated villages where paganism.
It was mostly because they were isolated and no one had gone there. They just continued in their local bumpkinry and
Yeah, I mean,
continued on.
there was. I remember because I was really fascinated with that, because I thought to myself, well, that can't be right. There must have been at least some point that some sort of missionary or some sort of diocese, missionary there. And what was quite interesting is there was some. I found an article at the time on some. Um, a sort of a site where they were digging up an old village of that time, and you had they found I guess offerings and what you would say like regional iconography to some goddess or something, but you also had like Christian symbols as well in like these properties. And so it's quite interesting because this is the thing. It's like same in Anglo-Saxon England. You had in Northumberland there was this great bit where one day these like fishermen were praying to Christian God and everything, and then the next day they sort of reverted back to Freya or something like that.
And that's that's primarily a result of a lack of education in terms of how religion works. It's you ever watch the movie The Mummy from like 2000 or something?
Yeah.
There's that character who, like, the mummy gets him and he just starts taking out random religious icons to pray.
Yeah.
Just you know
And he comes to like the Hebrew language, and
yeah.
and then the mummy says, "Oh yes, good. The slaves."
Yeah. It's a really good scene, but like for a lot of areas that were like kind of on the wayside of the world, out in the mountains or in the villages, like these people just didn't know how religion, like what religion was, and so they would just like collect random deities as like luck charms. It's more accurate to say it's really more accurate to say that they were agnostic than actual pagans or anything. They really just didn't they didn't know.
I don't know, because I mean, I understand what you mean. They didn't understand the concept of monolithism and
Even
and,
but like
and
even in the polytheistic way, like it's really more related to they just treated these idols as luck charms. Like it was just kind of like voodoo magic almost.
Well, yeah, accepted truths, and the thing there is, like, there was a great speech by Jonathan Bowden actually on, and he was talking about Carlyle and how Carlyle sort of bridged sort Christian Calvinism with pagan thought, and it's basically a lot of you're a villager in imagine you're a villager in this. Everything you see in the world, you step outside your property, is a miracle from the gods. The sheep that you keep, it's a miracle. The sky that it's not raining or not snowing, it's a miracle. And everything is in their mind direct intervention, especially for the Greeks, because for the Greeks everything is a direct intervention of the gods in their minds.
And that's actually a good differentiation between neo-pagans and classical pagans, because classical pagans did believe in an intervening gods, whereas neo-pagans kind of view them as these like platonic ideals that can't be contacted and really represent I just want to say this is one of the big reasons why neo-paganism isn't even pagan. It's more like
atheism.
It's more like it's really more like a kind of platonic religion. It's this belief, in the same way that you can like imagine a perfect square but can never see it in the world. They think that these aspects of reality, or human emotion, or experiential reality, there's this ideal that can't be touched, but you can like reflect it. And in this regard, neo-paganism today is not properly pagan, because the pagans of the classic era believed in like direct interventions from the gods. These neo-pagans today believe more in like striving to the ideal rather than receiving it. And again, this is one of the reasons why the Christian message was more receptive to ancient pagans than the neo-pagans, because the neo-pagans don't realize they're basically Platonists or Stoics in some sense. Whereas the ancient pagans, they understood the concept of grace. The neo-pagans don't.
Yes. So I think we just get started. So this is one of the...
we're half an hour in, finally getting started.
So we're sort of just covering around bases. So one of the accusations that I've been seeing time and time again, and this is not necessarily from an individual that we've mentioned, this is just, as I said, I've been following this around, is that the reason why, this is a title to the student, the reason why the Western Roman Empire, I say Western because they say Roman, but as we know, the Roman Empire didn't collapse until 1453 at the hands of Muslims. So, but anyway, the Western Roman Empire's collapse was down to the subversive nature of Christianity, which turned men away from a heroic worldview that paganism and Roman paganism and the imperial cult offered, and it fundamentally caused the collapse, and still has direct connections with what became liberalism and wokeism that we see today in the modern world, which led to modernity and technocracy. Somehow, I still don't understand how they've made that connection, but but let's deal with let's deal with their accusation of the one, and I see this quite often, is that Christianity made men in the Roman Empire weaker, which is one of the reasons why the Goths and the Vandals were able to capture, conquer territory, sack Rome, and effectively bringing an end to Latin dominance across the western portion of the empire.
Well, like the big problem there is, of course, that the Goths that were coming in were predominantly Aryan, not Aryan the race, Aryan the religion. So like it's not as if the conquering Germans were entirely pagan themselves. They were predominantly Aryan religions, mostly the followers of Arius. And so like the argument kind of falls flat at the start, because if Christianity is making the Latins weak, why isn't it making the Germans weak? It's like, it doesn't make sense. And of course, the Germans have always been stronger than the Romans because the Romans never could conquer Germany. So like the argument doesn't really work from either the pagan perspective or the Christian perspective, because when Rome and Germans were both pagans, the Germans were stronger, and when Rome and Germans were Christians, the Germans were still stronger.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at Armenia, you know, because Armenia was one. I think Armenia was the first kingdom to actually convert to as Christianity
Yeah,
as a state.
it's vague, but either Armenia and
Or
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
Yeah, those are the two first
Ethiopia.
ones. So like Armenia is of course
Those are two first.
Armenia is in the Caucasus Mountains. They're mostly Indo-European,
Apostolic.
and
Yeah.
and Ethiopia is of course African. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
And
Georgia didn't exist. There were
no,
people.
The I can't remember there is, like, on the western part of the Black Sea there was a kingdom there. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a Georgian, ethnically they would what we would say today to be Georgians, but yes.
Yeah, no, there were different. Yeah, there were a couple of people. So we also see, like, yeah, again with that, the first converts. Well, the first national conversions weren't even Jewish or Roman. They were like random mountain people and African people. So, but yeah, I mean, we can go further into this in the sense of what was the morality of Rome itself under paganism, because the neo-pagans seem to envision Rome as being this like better culture with better like standards and stuff like that. But I'm not convinced by this argument. I can go and reference a few of these things here because I collected them. I collect these things that kind of like I'll read a lot of history, but you know the premise that if a law exists, it's because someone fucked up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Especially codified law. Sorry, to interrupt. Especially codified law is when someone really has like effed up.
Yeah. So the Lex Julia is the legal system of the like late Republic, early Empire, and the Lex Julia has quite a few rules about widows and marriage and divorce. Namely, there's this interesting rule about 3 sons. I'm trying to find where it is. Where it go? I had a collection of it here. Yeah, Augustus in particular, he instituted the law of 3 sons, which held those in high regard who produced three males offspring. Marrying age celibates and young widows who would not marry were prohibited from receiving inheritances or from attending public games. The fact that the Romans had to add these laws to like punish being single and punish being divorced, you know, why would you add those laws if that wasn't a problem? And there are a number of other wars that go around. There is a quote by Augustus, I think, and a few others, essentially lamenting Rome's degeneracy. There's that famous quote that Augustus found the city of Rome stone and he left it a city of marble. And this is a true statement. If you look at the architecture of Rome, there's only like 3 things left from the Republic era. The sewers, 1/2 of a Senate house, which is, I think, like converted, and a bridge. And that's pretty much all that's left from the Republic era. There wasn't a lot of stuff built in the Republic era. There's this problem that happens when you look at ancient civilization where you kind of assume that the entirety of the civilization looked like the best of it, when in reality most of Republic era Rome was probably clay houses and wood shacks. It wasn't actually a very wondrous city. There's nothing really left from the Republic era because there wasn't anything worth saving from the Republic era. They didn't build big architecture. There's like I forgot that there's a 4th thing. There's a single temple, I think, to either Fortuna or Victoria. I forget which one. I think it's to a female god. A single small chapel to a pagan deity is like the only religious architecture left from the Republic era. these elements of the Republic era, they're small architecture. They're no bigger than like a mansion or a big house. They're very small. They're very humble. They're not often laid with marble. They're usually just like stone cut and stuff like that. And if you look at the Republic era, there really isn't a lot of evidence that this was a mighty civilization. They beat Carthage, and then they realized, we're kind of not that impressive compared to other people. And then they spent the next 100 years trying to like figure out how to do that. One of the reasons why it is said that, one of the reasons why Augustus says that he found Rome a city of cobblestone and left it a city of marble, is because he too saw Rome. And in addition to finding it so degenerate that he needed to make family laws, he found the Roman city to be full of divorcees, full of whores, full of like drunk men, a complete moral mess. He found the architecture to be pathetic and falling apart. He found basically a city that was like a cesspool. And so, in addition to the laws designed to demotivate amoral behavior, which Rome was rampant with, he also chose to institute a recruitment program, whereupon he would go through all the territories of the Roman Empire. Like, these are new territories. The Romans had only conquered Gaul and Israel, Palestine. In Augustus's life and Caesar's, Rome had conquered Gaul, a large portion of Iberia, the Middle East, parts of North Africa. Like, Rome had like tripled in size.
Anatolia from is it Mithridatic Wars?
Yeah. And so Rome had tripled in size in just a few decades, and so Augustus decided to go and find the best stonemasons, the best architects, the best designers from across these new conquered areas, and he brought them all into Rome. Now, if you know anything about Spengler and other writers, this is an IQ shredder. Augustus is bringing the best talent throughout the empire into Rome, depriving the empire of that quality talent, and essentially bring it all to Rome to work for 40 years and die alone. So Augustus has this massive building program to make Rome an actual city worthy of being called a capital. And he does succeed. He successfully transforms the capital from this cesspool cobblestone mess to a beautiful capital made of marble. And then for about 100 years, there's a large amount of architectural construction from the first and early second century. There's a large amount of construction. And then it just kind of sputters out because the people that were doing that work die off. Not many of them were getting married. Most of them were slaves, and a lot of them died without reproducing. And after that generation of quality talent was lost, Rome started to once again degenerate into the crisis of the third century. Multiple crises.
I was going to say that. I mean, because this is important. Now, one thing that for me that sort of shuts the argument down in my mind is that Christianity made the Roman fighting spirit weak, and that is not true in the sense that if you look at the wars in from the Battle of the Milvian Bridge onwards, let's say, because I think that's a pretty safe perspective to when you actually see like a Christian ruler somewhat arise in Constantine, which I know that's a controversial statement in some ways because he wasn't really a Christian, but I think he was more favorable to the Christians, and there was a lot of Christians in his circles, not just his not just his sister and his mother. There was also his many priests and bishops followed him, so there's obviously something in on that.
I don't really worry too much about Constantine, because he also wasn't he won a big battle to claim the spirit of Rome, but he didn't really do a lot in terms of maintaining it.
He was Greek. He was from the sort of Greek Greco East, and so for him, I think in some ways, I actually think Constantine was more romanticized with the Hellenic world over the Latin world, and I think that's probably one of the reasons. Because one thing you notice after the crisis of the 3rd century, a lot of the talent were like from
Greece,
the Greeks and the Greco world.
When the capital moves, the talent moves with it, and so what little talent was left in Rome essentially just left for Constantinople, and the city immediately began to decline. Like Rome was already having a talent crisis into the crisis of the 3rd century, like these like middle managers that were not great. But Rome has always had a talent crisis, right? Like they only won against Carthage because one guy was like, "Oh, we're kind of shit at war with this guy. Maybe we should do like guerrilla tactics instead of direct confrontation." Most of Rome's ability to win came from adopting the enemy's tactic that they were shit against and turning it on its head. And it wasn't really a matter of being a good fighting spirit or stronger or better. It was just being clever. And that most Roman tactics rely on being clever, not on being stronger or better. Like even like the Roman armor itself, the classic idea of a legion, this is just copy pasted from Gaul. Gaul invented the Roman legion's design. Rome used to have hoplites and other Greek-like military equipment. They came into contact with the Gauls. The Gauls were better fighters, so the Romans just copied them. And then later on, when the Greeks were the center of civilization again, they kind of went back to a Greek model of fighting because there were no more Gauls to fight.
Yeah, and also you have to remember after the sort of Constantine dynasty, because you remember there was that period as well before you had like Theodosius and Horus and his heirs. You had that period where you just had, especially in the West, you had usurper after usurper, and the problem is some historians don't even know if some of the usurpers were real. They just because it was literally.
I'm gonna bail for 5 minutes to get dinner. I'll be right back.
Okay.
But feel free to fill there. My thought for the next couple of minutes. All the architecture of Rome that from the classic era that exists predominantly comes from that Augustus Julian lineage and a couple of decades after it. After that lineage and the talent pool dried up, Rome's architecture stopped being built up. Pretty much all the buildings you know from Rome, that like the classic idea of Rome, that from ancient Rome, they were all built in that era, with a couple of exceptions. And I would argue that Rome really never had the glorious civilization that neo-pagans imagine it. It had a fake inflation of quality from Augustus's building programs and talent sucking. But once that IQ shredder started going back to business as usual, it just didn't last. Like Rome's civilization might have lasted for a long time, but most of it was done in a phased catabolism and collapse of the things around it. Rome itself was never sustainable. And if you do look up the records of birth and death, and this can be calculated in a few ways from like reported average birth rates and things like that. I forget how you could calculate it, but you basically find that Rome never had a replacement birth rate ever. It was never a sustainable concept. It relied entirely on importing labor and immigrants. And so, I know a lot of neo-pagans are angry about immigration and globalism, but I'm sorry, guys. Rome was a globalist city built on immigrants that couldn't sustain itself. It was an IQ shredder.
It was a metropolis. It went beyond just a normal city. It was a metropolis.
But it wasn't sustainable. It was never a sustainable concept, and it relied primarily on periodic consumption of quality talent that would rob another place of that talent, and then they wouldn't allow these slaves to breed very much or do very much, so the talent would just dissolve away. My thesis is that Rome actually delayed civilization in Europe. It didn't boost it. That's controversial, but I'll be right back.
Be right back. So I just wanted to say hello to Crusader 21, Voltra, Minion, and Nathan Hood. Thank you all. And yes, it was Morgoth who came up with the phrase hatchling. That's right, Voltra. Yeah. And I mean that's a good way of it's a real scummy, shitty tactics for the left to do, because it's kind of, I actually think it's more pathetic than using like mid-century German, because you're basically trying just to behave like an idiot, and it's really embarrassing. I don't get it. Nathan Hood says, was Rome the London of its day? Yeah. The problem, yes and no. The problem is, Nathan, is that never before in human history, and it will same for Rome. Even under the Roman rule, there were laws in place that I mean, for a time, only like Roman Latins could have certain rights and privileges in the vicinity of Rome and Rome itself. But also, there was never a time in Rome, in Western Rome's history, where there was a minority group running the show who were constantly degrading the the Latin, Italian, or Italic speaking people who made up the backbone of Rome and its civilization. Not like we have today in Britain, where there is constant belittling of the national identity and and its people. Same in America and everywhere else in the West. And I think it's and I think that's where I would draw the separation, and even in I have seen accusations that Christianity was very much favored. It was favored among the Greeks, which was true. It was definitely in its earlier spread. It was very much Greco-focused, and but even then, it wasn't. It wasn't explicitly subverting and attacking any. It doesn't attack the ideology that produces. It doesn't attack any identity group. And so this is the thing. I yes, it is like London in the sort of economic sense and the metropolis sense. It's quite an interesting thing actually, because Stephen Carlson Radlib, he takes the view, and I think it was on his Christian vanguardism video, that we can't, as the right, you can't give up the cities, because the cities is what breeds culture. And going back to the Christianity was spread and cultivated within cities in Anatolia, in Egypt, in Palestine, Syria, and Greece, and of course in Italy and elsewhere. It was in Carthage. It was in cities that it would spread, and it wasn't until the third, fourth century it started spreading in
Okay, I'm
rural
back.
bits. Okay, so that's one perspective that why you can't really just say, well, we'll give up on the cities and let it become stab central, like London has. But I mean, what do you think? I was just saying about the comparison of, there was a point where Rome, did Rome degenerate? Could Nathan Hood was saying, was Rome the London of its day? And I said, you can draw that comparison, and I think that is a fair one. But there's also an important difference, Cringe. I say, because there was never a point in Rome's history, political history, where you had a small group who had total political dominance over the population and fed the population anti-Latin, anti their own group messaging. That never happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is that, like, in order for the neo-pagan argument to work, they try and say paganism is a white slur, but like this makes no sense, because if I show you a picture of like an African voodoo guy and a Buddhist monk, you know that this is pagan. Like, this is not Christian. Like, this is a dumb argument.
Well, the actual word pagan is Latin for villager. It's for a rural person, because of course if you were to go
Yeah.
back, because as I mentioned, Christianity was seeded, fermented, and birthed within cities in the Roman Empire. Many of the cities in Anatolia, Ephes, uh, and Nicomedia, and um, Thessalonica, Antioch. There was, and it wasn't really until the age. It wasn't really even until Theodosius that Christianity really became was really pushed into the countryside.
Well, let's define countryside, okay? I'm sorry if you can hear me eating, but so most of Rome's countryside, quote unquote, was villas and industrial farming, basically, like plantations. They weren't really like this idea that the Roman countryside was country bumpkins, and this is a very Americanized view of what the countryside was. The Italian countryside was mostly slaves and landlords. It's actually more so. It's actually more similar to the American South than in this idea. The English have their idea of the countryside. The Irish have, a lot of these neo-pagans come from an English or an Irish background, and they have this idea of the countryside that isn't adaptable to the Roman countryside. When they're saying paganism means the rural or country person, it's not the common bumpkin. It's the noble guy. It's more like the KFC colonel, right? Like the guy who's driving the slaves. It's not the slaves themselves. This is actually why Uberboy's argument was a bit self-contradictory, because he's trying to argue that it was like the urban slaves that were becoming Christian, and the elites were Christian, but the rural bumpkin, that's not true. It was the rural nobleman who had slaves who were probably Christian also, but his landlord status, he would control the landlords, the local shrines, the local sacrifices. This landlord would be the one funding a lot of the local township architecture and stuff like that. But fundamentally, you're not talking about like the English countryside. You're talking about like the manor houses and plazas, not plazas. What's the word I'm looking for? Manor houses and there's an Italian word for like a country house.
Not like a villa or
a villa. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, villa. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are villas owned by Rome's retired legions and landlords and old people that are rich. It's not country bumpkins. This is nonsense. Up in Gaul, where it's a little bit more similar to the English countryside, those country people were already Christian fundamentally. Like France is famous for its older Christianity than other parts of Europe. So the paganness of being a rural, it's more. I know it's like rural, rustic meaning, but it's usually means like the land. It's not the country bumpkins like you sorry AI. Like you do not represent a pagan in that sense. You represent more a slave.
Okay. All right. Yes. I do think there are some parts in the Western Roman Empire where, when I say rural, I mean, let's say there are provinces where you didn't have major settlements that you could say in the Med. I'm thinking of like northern Spain, for example, the Basque region, where the paganism was, because it was so isolated, that as we mentioned earlier, paganism was dominant because Christianity just didn't spread. And also you have to remember that in some cities like Milan, for example, which is kind of that's an interesting case, because that in that city it was actually I think Ambrose talked about it being up until the what was it, the 4th century, it was still majority non-Christian and still following sort of pagan some form of pagan belief, which is kind of rare at that point, because at that point Rome and many other cities in Italy were majority Christian, and I guess it sort of it was regional variations.
Yeah,
I
like the cities did convert first.
Yeah.
And the reason why it took a while to convert the villas is because these were like very rich and well-meaning people. They weren't the kind of people that would give a shit about religion in general, other than like, they were more interested in their little rustic life, writing poetry. They were basically like, I'm gonna be honest, the closest thing to a pagan, in the Roman sense, not pagan religious, but like pagan, like the rural dweller, is kind of more like a Japanese lord on the land who just spends his time writing poetry under the cherry tree and noting things. And like these are people that were like middle class, upper class, and retirees and basically legionnaires who had been given the land after their service, and so they're raising their families there after a year. They did their 40 years in the Legion, and now they have their money and land and their 40 acres and a meal, and they're going to raise their family. These aren't really the people that are going to be they're done with life. They're enjoying their retirement, and their sons are kind of like trust fund babies. They're like the kind of people that live in like these mansions in the countryside with like 40 acres. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a while. I mean, it's going to take a while for religion to even reach them. Like whatever happens in the city, they're not really aware of it. In America, there are these kind of people too. They're like the boomer dads who have like $200,000 in savings and have no idea that the world is ending. Right? They're just like they're just chilling in their mansions in the countryside from like, oh yeah, man, the kids, they don't work anymore, says the guy who like grew up in the easiest part of American history.
I mean, yeah. Again, if you think back to what I was saying about from their perspective, this would have been okay. The emperor has got a new religion, and this is the thing. What you had in from the 3rd century onwards, you had very and it is somewhat separated from paganism, but at the same time, it's not. Is like these mysteries cults.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point though. The mystery cults were also somewhat popular in these villas.
Yeah.
They not originally. They started becoming popular. They were also they were very popular in the cities too. But I'm probably speaking a little out of term, so I'm not going to speak too much because I haven't read it fully. But I would compare the Mithras and other cults that were happening, like ISIS cults. These are basically like, how middle class white women love their crystals.
Yeah. It's very much like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, they're not country bumpkins. They're just like, if you'll forgive me, there's the only thing I can think of is a Russian word that my grandma used to use, which is idiotchanka, or something like that, and that basically means idiot, educated idiot. And
basically someone who attends like Berkeley and
yes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I know the type. So it reminds me, because I was actually reminded there was a great documentary by I know it sounds shocking. It was a BBC. It was a really old BBC documentary. And I think it was I can't remember what it was. It was basically Rome, the Eternal City, and he started off with reading a passage from I think it was actually Ambrose again, and it was basically about how unknown author. That was it. It was unknown author. It was about how this foreign goddess arrived on this boat in and then up the Tiber to Rome on this barge, and she was paraded through the city streets and everything by it's people. Senators were there, military people were there, and and many of the wives. It was all the women and everything. It was like a big like feminist fuck around festival, and it was for the goddess Isis. And what was quite interesting is the unknown author kept on referring her as a foreign god, outlander sort of foreign god, or goddess. And one thing that's quite interesting, and this is something that I've sort of put this to a few neo-pagans, and they can't really. I don't think they really understand, or they don't really have much of a response for this. Is there was a point where, in that example, the people, paganism was very much dominated by the mystery cults of Mithras, but also Isis, Horus, Serapis, Sol Invictus, like all these either Egyptian or Iranian or Eastern gods, that they usurped the roles of the classical Roman gods. And for me, one of the things that pagans, especially Germanic, the sort of survivor jive types, that they are right about is Christianity is ultimately universal religion. It's a universal religion. It's universal in nature, which is true. But one thing that paganism can always claim is that paganism is rooted in a people, and you can't be. This is why I can't see like Nordic pagans who like live in like Missouri or something.
Yeah,
it's just ridiculous.
There is like you're saying, like the Romans did start to do that. They did start to collect other gods from other cultures to basically replace or enlighten or enrich. Let's say enrich their own.
And the problem is when you have like 3 centuries of rapid change on the sort of that landscape in the imperial cult, where you had all these different gods and these different positions, that you actually have this real where the accusation of Christianity is a foreign religion. Actually, it's the only one that is consistent for 300 years. While a lot,
I also wanted to point out, this is something I've also been asking pagans, but like I said before, a lot of neo-pagans are more Platonic than they are actual pagans, and so I'll often ask, like, okay, you have a god of like love, right?
Yeah.
What is it about the love your people shows that can't be found in other cultures that would denote the need of a new god of that kind of love from your culture? And recently I did like an example of like, is there something different about the thunder in Africa that Thor wouldn't be the god of thunder in Africa? And I do notice that pagans have neo-pagans, I should say, have a difficulty in explaining this. Of course, like the original pagan view is that no, there isn't any difference. The gods are universal. They just have different names in different cultures, like the Translatio Imperio, Translatio Divinity, where the Romans basically just looked at the gods of other cultures and associated them with their own.
But the problem with that though is like in the Egyptian one, I think Serapis doesn't have an equivalent outside of Egyptian religion though.
Yeah, there are exceptions to this, but like there's translation and there's addition. But for the pagans that are trying to associate a god for their specific culture, I find they can't really specify why, like what's the unique feature about that versus other cultures. Like you can find love in every culture, and the Romans would think, yeah, there's a god of love, and she has different names in other cultures, but it's still the same god. Whereas what the neo-pagans are trying to say is that no, there's just the god for my people, and it's unique to us. So again, this is another example of how neo-pagans are not really pagans because they're not really following the logic of the pagan thinker. And the neo-pagan kind of can't explain why their god isn't universal, because the human emotion or the force of nature or the divinity aspect of it can be found anywhere. Like there's no fundamental difference between how an African wants to like express love versus how a European wants to express love. The cultural differences come in more so proportion and extreme of the intensity of the behavior rather than the existence of it. Not to be too racist, but like there are clearly certain cultures in this world which have a greater intensity of violence and a deity of violence than another culture, but it's still like violence. It's still fundamentally violence. So the pagan would say yes because that people are closer to like the god of Mars, the god Mars, because they're more warlike. Whereas the neo-pagan would be like, oh, they must have some foreign god that's more violent. And that difference in thinking is, it's proof that they're not really pagan. They're more like they're kind of balancing contradictory views in terms of wanting to be Platonists of the god being like this ideal manifestation of something, but also it's localized to their culture and not other cultures, which is a contradiction to that Platonic idea. And this is a contradiction in their beliefs that they I don't think I've seen any like proper explanation for it. Because it's holding contradictory thoughts. You can't simultaneously have a unique god to your culture that is also a Platonic ideal for the universe. That doesn't work that more. What I've been saying is that well, like fundamentally, then your god is just a skin suit for a concept that can be found anywhere. Your god isn't unique to your culture; it's a skin suit for something that can be found anywhere. And this has I've seen like people can't really explain this that much. And that's kind of departing from what you're talking about. The some aspects of gods were imported to Rome because Rome lacked that concept, and they wanted to like make a full pantheon. But more often than not, the Romans would go to another culture and find gods that relate to their own, and then just start building temples, in as like a kind of bridge between the two cultures. Because again, the Roman pagan idea is that there is a god for a concept or emotion or experience or a force of nature or something divine beyond that can be found anywhere. And it will have different names, but it'll be the same entity. And so from the Roman perspective, the classical perspective rather, there isn't a difference between like the African god of war and the Roman god of war. They're both the same god of war with a different name. It's actually more universal. Whereas the Christian god would be like, there is a high god, a central god, and he gives his gifts to saints in different cultures to manifest that in like to their culture. And this this is why I like Christianity a lot better in terms of like, well, more of the old version of Christianity, not so much it's hard for me to view Christianity as a universalist religion because it is open to all people, but in terms of how that people receive the gifts of the Spirit, it's kind of like, well, your culture and church do it in the way you want. You have these creeds that codify belief, and all men all men can be saved, but all men will not practice that salvation the same way. Though some will want to emphasize, Norse pagans when they converted to Christianity, they were very keen to go out into the world and explore and do things in the world, from Vinland to Persia. Whereas French, when they converted, they were more interested in the arts. They were more interested in like expressing iconography. And these are different manifestations of like different gifts of the Spirit under a central god. Whereas the pagan would, and again, that is very pagan, similar to the pagan, but it's not how neo-pagans think.
I also think it comes back to like how one views history, whether it's endless progression to a better life, or a sort of more Christian sort of linear aspect of history that everything's getting worse, or if you believe in what again ancient pagans, ancient people, which was a cyclical view of history.
A number of pagans do, bring in the Kali Yuga cycle into their beliefs.
Okay.
I'll say this: the scene from Jurassic Park where there are missing DNA gaps in the dinosaurs that they fill in with amphibians.
Yep.
That's kind of what the neo-pagans are doing, where the gaps in their beliefs are filled in with Hinduism, which is kind of weird. I mean, yeah, okay. Hinduism and neo-paganism are both from are both from an Indo-European root, but I don't really follow the logic that my religion has a gap on this topic of like eternal cycles or progressive history. I'll just insert the Hindu DNA into my beliefs because I don't want to be inserting from Christians. Like, okay, that's weird, but okay. But yeah, a lot of neo-pagans have the Kali Yuga cycle from Julius Evola, which is a Hindu cycle, a Hindu belief. So they've basically inserted this Hindu belief to get a lot, because in the Greek and the Greeks and especially the Neo-Pagans, that there is basically a vagueness for the longer time spans and like collapse and rebirth cycles. There is, of course, the Ragnarok and the rebirth of the gods, but in the Greek view, it's kind of stationary. It's neither progress or cyclical. It's just stationary.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I do subscribe to the idea that there is a cycle of sort in history, and I think, and I've made the point before that whether or not Christianity, I don't think Christianity is really doesn't really impact on that, because I don't think it's just behavior of men and cultures and ethnic groups, and you have to remember that, I mean, I think what with the collapse of Western Rome is, and in Peter Heather's book, which was the fall of Rome, he actually he leans into the idea that what you see, it's not so much the fall of Rome, it's just the rise of a Germanic spirit, which had sort of was on the ascendance point.
Yeah, this is. Sorry, go on. Finish your thought. Sorry.
And it carried on for a while. I think he sort of goes up. It says, well, it sort of carries on to the Normans, and I do think. I mean, I will say this. I think in the 11th century, the Normans really did carry Christianity in the West.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a lot to say about God's promise to the sons of Japheth and which sons are most loyal to that message, and the rewards from heaven that befall such people that are faithful. It seems to me that any time a son of Japheth has undertaken the call to go out and fill the world with both their presence and the gospel, the Old Testament is go out and fill the world. The New Testament is go out and make the disciples of the world, and that there's an overlap to those two calls in the Old and New Testament. But the peoples, especially of the Japheth line, that have done that the most faithfully, as Genesis 9 says, they will be blessed most fervently. Again, like the Bible predicted that the Indo-European sons of Japheth, specifically the Javan line, these are people like Tarshish that might have been Britain in the Old Testament. These lineages are like they're said, if you bow to God in the tents of Shem, that means go to church. You will be given global dominion, and I would say history has proven that this prophecy is true. No Indo-European pagan belief system says that the Indo-European will rule the world if they're faithful to their gods. It just says that they'll be respected by the gods. Only the Christian religion says if you obey this God and you're of this descent, you will be given the world dominion until Christ comes back, which is kind of a nice. It's like a base as hell for the British Empire, but the second the faith in Christ weaned, so too did the empire.
True. I would also, because I remember we did a stream, I think on New Year's Eve, and we sort of talked about the Dark Ages, the Visigoths, and but I think we mainly talked about Anglo-Saxon England as well, and the myth. And I'm actually, because I'm sort of writing a few things for Substack, and I was thinking of writing one for the Dark Ages, like the mythos behind the Dark Ages. And I think what has happened is in popular academia and in popular culture, the Dark Age. I don't think the Dark Ages really existed. I think it's just it's a fictional point. But at the same time, I think what the Dark Age probably did exist in England, and what has happened is because of historical Anglo dominance around the world and everything, world history is very much hyper focused on what happens in and around England. I mean, 1066 is seen, even in America, as a important point to the start of the Norman period. But even though Normans, you could argue that was their sort of the end of the Norman chapter in some ways. That was towards the end. The start of it would have been Rollo and everything, but it's so amplified what happens in England, the rest of like the continent of like Spain and the Visigoths and the Franks and the Burgundians and everything, and the Roman Empire, the reclaimed Roman territories of Italy, is sort of left. It's ignored, and so I think, and I will say that I think the collapse of Rome was definitely the worst of it happened in Roman Britain, without a shadow of a doubt. I think it's fair to say, because there was a great I was reading this genetic study about what happened, because again there has been like this constant debate about how much demographic replacement occurred in Roman Britain amongst between the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, because of course when the Anglo-Saxon Jutes arrive and start to carve out territories in England, in Roman Britain, there you see very little to like Christianity is kind of like it never existed there, but we know it existed. I think through like sort of like Saint Patrick and everything, who references the church and the political structure existing in Roman Britain at the time, because his father was a prefect, I believe, in one of the in the political structure. So we understand that there was a strong Christian presence at that time. And what this genetic study actually shows is that there was a 75% demographic change in Roman Britain when the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes arrive. And we even see that because of the changes, it's largely down to the causes of it is we're not really sure. I mean, for me personally, I think the Justinian plague.
That's one reason.
That's one reason. Wars, and then of course, the Angles and the Jutes. That we know that there was human sacrifice. They were pretty savage. They probably were very capable warriors, and the numbers of them meant that a lot of the people went westwards in Britain to Wales, Cumbria, and the southwest of England, where you find today a lot of high Celtic genealogical ancestry for the people that live there today. And I mean, when they come in, they don't adapt their religion to anything that came before. They're pretty much solidly, it's like a clean slate. Near enough.
Well, I didn't quite follow the pagans.
The Germanic, the Angles and the Saxons, when they come in, you actually see that according to the studies, some of the burials, you'll see women of Romano-British descent who will be in the first like in the because they started arriving in what was it the 5th, 6th century period, right?
Yeah.
5th century.
Although they were calling it the Saxon Shore for quite a while.
Well, you see in the first generation, you see Romano Brits buried among Saxons with Christian iconography, mainly women. You see a lot of them buried with Christian iconography in a Christian style. But as the years go on, or as generations go on, you slowly see because you did have Romano Brits living within the Anglo-Saxon realms that existed at that time. But over time, you slowly see them adopting the sort of the pagan religion, which is not surprising, because you have to remember when 75% of your population has been wiped out, including like a political structure and everything else. It's not really surprising that there was such a rapid shift, and I think honestly, I mean, it's a shame there isn't really any good films or TV shows ever done about it, because that is like the closest thing I think you could ever come for a apocalyptic vision
Yeah.
was from the point of view of the Romano Brits, and because I think it definitely was apocalyptic, if from their perspective. Yeah, and so for me, I think that is the real Dark Ages. But trouble is, a lot of it is applied to Rome, and I mean, as I said last time, okay, you go to Rome today and you see a lot of ruins, but that was mainly over the back and forth sieges during the Gothic Wars with Justinian. It's like every time Justinian either entered the city or kicked out and then re-entered it, that's what sort of brought Rome into ruin.
Yeah, this is something important to remember. The Dark Ages in Europe were done by Romans, not the Germans.
Yeah,
and in fact, it was like a very like stupid idea of like, oh, we're just gonna like burn everything down and make it Roman again. Yeah, okay, now there's no one left. Congratulations, you've started the Dark Ages.
yeah, and also, I mean, to be fair to them, you had the Justinian plague, which happened, which
Yeah.
wiped out in the
You know,
Mediterranean.
I've come around to thinking maybe that there should be less emphasis on the Justinian plague because we don't really have the data to know what happened. It's difficult to say what happened. It may have been as bad as said, but it's not clear. There is clearly a depopulation, but whether that was because of migration or disease is not clear, unfortunately.
It's hard to. I've seen one conflicting one, which I guess I sort of believe is that the only major effect it has is in Italy and in the rest of the empire in the east is it depopulated the cities.
Yeah, the cities were
People went,
depopulated. And again, this is when the countryside was converted because, you know, they stopped being they stopped being rural pagans essentially. I don't know if I might have my timeline wrong there. Never mind. I didn't say that.
no. So at that point, it was yeah. But
yeah. Sorry.
I
I
was going to
guess.
say. Sorry, continue. Sorry.
No, I was thinking where I wanted to take this. I've often claimed that the Dark Ages, like I've controversially said it quite a number of times. We both agree that Dark Ages didn't exist, but I've gone so far as to say they were an improvement on Rome. This is a very controversial statement, but it basically stems from the fact that there is a lot. So when the term Dark Ages was invented, there wasn't a whole lot of like well-known writing from the time period, but over the years, things have been found and added to, and essentially like. There were a number of things that were not even in English, so it wasn't possible. It was actually not known. How can I say this? It's not as if people in the English-speaking world knew about these documents because they weren't translated. That's what I want to say. I personally very much so enjoy the letters of Theodoric and some Ostrogothic kings. The letters of the Visigoths and Ostrogoths show a clear desire to rebuild Rome. They weren't like the end of civilization as
and Emperor, was it Zeno or Leo? I can't remember which one. I think maybe Zeno. Totally just blanked the Theodoric in letters.
Blank, you mean, or?
Yeah. He just kind of ignored the Goths.
Yeah. And the Goths were like they managed the West fairly well because they respected the civilization. I made a response to Uberboer's post that in many ways the Goths follow the same patterns he was claiming Christians were following, but once the Goths converted to Christianity, they didn't seek revenge against the pagan Romes. They were just like, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. When the Goths took over, they respected the civilization. They didn't like do a Nietzschean slave revolt against them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I also, this is I like to do this, like when you see like boomer cons in the UK, and you see like on a question time where they interact with, like, say, Sadiq Khan, and they say about Sadiq Khan, like, what are you going to do about, what about all these like Asian immigration or something? What's Labour Party's position on that? And it's like, just imagine like a Roman citizen in the forum talking to like a Gothic, uh, a Gothic
Well,
lord, or no,
yeah.
hold on, like a Gothic lord or nobleman, and saying to them, "What are you going to do about all the Goths?" I mean, it's kind of like, yeah. The thing is, they are a minority. Because the thing there is, and I think this is important to remember, in the with the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, there wasn't that many of them. They were not that, like in comparison, there really wasn't that
Yeah,
many.
when in 406 the Goths and a few other tribes crossed the Rhine, and they were numbered at something like 30,000 people. At the time, Rome's population may have been as high as 100,000 people, which is kind of a fascinating thought, because it means that, like, well, if you have a, what was it? I lost my train of thought again. The population difference between hundreds of millions, no, tens of millions of Romans and 30,000 Germans, is like astronomical. So you can't really argue that they were conquering Rome. They were kind of being like, you don't conquer a country at those numbers unless you're wanted, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, of course, they would ultimately work and function within the Roman system, but actually, a lot like the Visigoths, a lot of them settled in um, places like Aquitaine, Septimia, and then sort of in northern, in sort of like coastal parts of Spain. It was it like the actual people. And as I say, I mean, like even with the Franks, I mean, if you actually I saw I saw a map once of the more Germanic part of the Franks was where the Salian Franks originated, and then the rest of the Franks were full of like Gallic, Catholic, Gallic Christian, Romano population still, and that's why Clovis, when he was when he became the king, it was kind of like you had bishops at the time, like bishops of Lyon, who had like their had their own retinue. It was very normal for bishops to have their own force, which they would of course swear allegiance to the king or
Yeah,
whatever.
and they're usually
Um,
German by the end.
yeah, a lot of them were Germanized. So
Well, not
it,
Germanized; they were Romanized Germans.
Romanized Germans. That's right. I mean, you did have some bishops who were like Gothic bishops and such, but or like Gothic senators or Frank. But I do think that again, I think that go back to like elite theory. You have to remember that because of there's so many usurpers, constant conflicts. I mean, like in Britain, there was like 5 like different emperors, usurpers, which created
Yeah.
battles, and so the actual manpower of the Western Legion was completely it was depleted to such an extent that them bringing in Gothic auxiliaries and Gothic warriors into the ranks, it wasn't out of the ordinary, historically speaking, for Rome. I guess one could argue that if you had, say, like 3,000 or 6,000 Goths warriors in your military, it could change the nature of your military, but it made the Roman military more. They became more sort of mobile horsemen more than anything. It made them less infantry focused.
Yeah,
But
the Romans really, again, the Romans didn't have like a real clear strategy for what they wanted. They would just adapt their military to whatever was needed. And when you go against the Attila's cavalry, you need horsemen to counter them. So the Roman military became more equites.
yeah, and so did and the same with the Eastern Empire. They became with the Sassanids, and because the Sassanids would they were famous for being horsemen as well in their
Yeah.
military, and so they would adapt. They
So
adapted as well.
I guess if we want to, because I've been kind of like detached for a second from thinking about this. Let's return to. I want to mention something about. I mentioned before the Goths kind of follow the same model that Uberboy outlined for Christians, where they start as
Yeah.
essentially slaves of Rome and then come to power, and almost people claim did like vengeance porn basically against the Romans. And so the question ultimately is like, well, why didn't they burn down the Roman civilization and enter a dark age? It seems like they were more willing to inherit the empire, and because of quite frankly, because of the Christian virtue connected to other Christians in the empire, the brotherhood between the Germans and the Romans forged a new culture rather than one slaughtering the other in a more Nietzschean manner. The slave and the master basically joined forces to become a new civilization, and that was medieval Europe. And so this kind of like breaks Nietzsche's model. It doesn't really work.
Well, yeah, no, it doesn't work. I mean, the only scenario where you could argue that as well is the Angles and the Saxons. But as I stated before, unlike they weren't Goths. They were totally separate. Even ethnically, they're totally separate. But they had no connection to Rome beforehand. They weren't. They had very little to no connection to Rome. They were very much still like the Scandinavians.
Yeah, they
And
came from the
so,
Isle of Gothels, which is in the not Black Sea, I'm saying in the Baltic Sea.
yeah, and so it, it there was it was very different. I guess that maybe Uberboy might say, yeah, but what about the Vandals in Carthage? Because the Vandals they did like destroy Carthage. And,
Yes, the Vandals were the least
friendly
accepting.
towards Rome.
Yeah, but they're also the least Christian. So they were the. It's funny, like because like the groups that were the least friendly to civilization were the least Christian. So
but the thing is, wasn't there sort of distaste for Rome because they were Arian and that they were kind of like Uber Aryans,
the
Christians.
the Vandals are. I don't know a whole lot about them. They definitely migrated the most. They were a very agitative people. They were not. They didn't like the idea of. They seemingly didn't like the idea of settling down anywhere. But like, it's also worth mentioning like Goths, Vandals, Franks. These are tribes that all come from the general same area. That they all intermingled. And by the time of the Roman conquests, the time of the Goths conquering Rome, these were people that were kind of blended into like a general Germanic form. There wasn't really like this is Frank, this is Goths. The only differentiating factor appears to have been the Goths were blonde and the Vandals were blonde also. Actually, the Franks were black haired, and I think that was pretty much the only differentiation. Actually, they all had the same general nations.
Yeah, I mean the Franks, black hair, brown hair, the Saxons were, they were kind
Blonde.
of the Anglo-Saxons were the Angles were more
Saxons,
blonde.
Saxons, Franks, Goths, and Lombards all kind of came from the general area, and so like their names kind of take cultural differences more so than genetic differences. The Lombards, means long hair. The Franks, I think it has something to do with. I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember enough to talk about it, but yeah. So
I did a Viking tour of Northumberland, and what was quite interesting is that there was record accounts of when this is when the first Viking from Norse raiders arrived, or Norse explorers, and I guess to give you a clue how close Saxons and were to the more so than of the Norses when they arrived, they could understand each other and communicate quite easily in like a broken sort of Northern Germanic language. They could understand, and you see they were all quite surprised that they could understand each other because for them they weren't really sure The Norse weren't really sure, really, of the peoples there. They all they knew is that they were followers of Rome.
Yeah.
They knew, of course. I mean, they knew about Rome. Ragnar Lothbrok knew about Rome, and they all knew about Rome and everything. So, Old Frisian, yeah, because this is a lot of the first waves came actually from what's modern day Frisia, like Western Germany, Northwest Germany.
Yeah, so I guess we should probably get more on topic on terms of the
Yes. So yeah. Sorry, I'm doing Germanic. I'm talking about Germanic.
a lot of Germanic autism we both love. But
I know it's
so
getting out.
my contestation basically is that if you look at the Romans by the time of the collapse were like just not trustworthy people, whereas the Germans were hired specifically because they actually kept their word. Like one of the main reasons why the Romans hired Germans so much is that they actually kept their word. They were trustworthy people. Now, there's the NeoPagans tend to assume that the Germans were all pagan, but again, I've said a couple times, by the time they were entering Rome, they were predominantly Arian. The religion Arianism is the religious belief that Christ was created rather than eternal. It's major disagreement, but essentially the Germans kind of saw in Christ a better Thor, and so most of them ended up converting to Arianism. But there's still a question of like, okay, you have this Christian people coming into a Christian empire, and under Uberboyer's assertion, I don't know, how do you interpret this? Because like they're both Christian, and the Germans still prove stronger anyway. So I want to ask, like, it's just because like Christianity weakens them both equally, or is it more like there's a reason for this? I don't know.
Mean, this is the thing. I don't understand really what. I mean, unless he's saying that when the Arian Christians arrived, is he getting at that they specifically targeted the remaining sort of like Greco-Roman pagans in like Italy and in Gaul and everywhere else, or because but at the same time, I mean, then yeah, you can't really argue that. I will. I mean, yeah. His argument would be, yeah, but Arian Christianity isn't what emerged from Rome. It was that what was from Nicene to Chalcedonian and Christianity, and that sort of existed in the native Latin population. But I mean, on the surface, all on the factual level, the Roman legions never, they never actually crumbled because of open conflict with a foreign, with a foreign foe arriving in their lands.
Well, the legions were slowly Germanicized and became the personal assets of German lords. Like there's this idea, like I think most people have in our mind this idea that there were legions in the 2nd century, and by the 5th they were like basically gone. But no one really ever explains that too much. Like, well, would they go? In reality,
you had so many military reforms that from the time of the 2nd, 3rd century to the arrival to the sort of the Gothic age in the Western Empire, yeah, it was more like a personal fief's army, near enough. It wasn't, but the thing is, the fighting capability, and I think this is what a lot of them are getting at, is the Latin, because I mean,
but that's also sorry.
So I just wanted to say, like, Theodoric, okay, before the Ostrogoths, Theodoric, the kingdom of Italy and everything that was created, he had Latinized Roman legionnaires in his military during I think even during the siege of Ravenna. Now, the thing though is, the argument from a lot of the neo-pagans is, well, they were so like cupped and demoralized and weak men, and unable to and lacked all transcendental spirit and everything because of their Christianity and everything. And probably by that time they were Christian at that particular point. They probably were Christian, but they were still a capable fighting force that could defeat enemies on the battlefield. We know this because it happened, and even through the age of Justinian, because remember Justinian's army wasn't just Greek.
Let's be honest here. The reason why the Romans were losing is because they were no longer fighting mere barbarians. They were fighting like well-armed and educated German like elite soldiers.
Yeah, they were fighting themselves, because this is the thing: is they were basically fighting other legionnaires, and this is why. I mean, because in some way, Aurelian, during the crisis of the 3rd century, he was a unique figure. I think he definitely could say he was a great man, because he managed to keep the Roman Empire together. And now in all other circumstances, and I've run the test on Rome Total War, in all other circumstances,
that's better model than COVID, isn't it?
It's better model than COVID. Well, every time I do it, I can't keep the empire together. I fucking knows how he managed to do it. I mean, he died doing it. He was assassinated like in the end of the. So I don't know how. So at that point, it was very possible that the empire could have been split into 3. Ultimately, it was split into
it's difficult to say. Like, what am I saying? What was I going to say? The dividing an empire doesn't mean it stays divided. This is something that is like projected. Oh, it's never going to come to. The concept of a nation state doesn't come around to the 1600s. To the Roman perspective, they have imperium, which is a concept which means power. But if that imperium is shared by other Romans who are also like ruling parts of their empire, it's still Roman. It's still the Roman Empire in their mind. That's why they didn't care about splitting the empire in 2 eventually, because in their minds, it's still one Roman Empire. It's just that now some of it is located in Constantinople and some of it's located in Rome.
And this is why you had the whole stupid debate. I mean, do you remember? I think it was like with a few years ago.
The Byzantine Romans.
The Byzantine Romans.
They're not Latins, but they are Romans, right?
Yeah, because they refer to themselves as Romans.
Well, not only that, there is a term. Roman used to mean a resident of Rome, and then the people that came from that city. But over the years, Roman self-understanding of what that word meant become any tribe that was loyal to the empire. In Theodosian's edict in like whatever the hell year, in the Edict of Milan, he regards anybody in the Roman Empire who is part of the church as a Roman. This is why the Roman Catholic Church is called what it is, because it's a connotation that if you're part of the church, you're a Roman. So it went from a ethnic identity to a pseudo-religious cultural citizenship kind of identity, like something partially religious, something partially civic, not ethnic.
Yeah, it wasn't until the 7th century with the was it the Herculean dynasty that you actually saw Greek or like a very specific Thracian Greek.
100 years ago, people in Anatolia were still calling themselves Roman.
Oh yeah. Even like just before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, before it was divided up and everything, they were still referring themselves as Roman. And one thing that was interesting, so I lived in a former part of the Eastern Roman Empire. Not at its time, not like 2,000 years old or anything like that. But when I remember,
you're in the British administration of the former Roman Empire.
a former territory in the former territories. But I remember even seeing on buildings, and even like I remember there was like a girl who had like this backpack, and she had the Roman eagle and the sort of Cairo symbol on there, and they refer to it as they refer to themselves in some ways as like the true heirs of Rome. And that's the thing. It's like we're the true heirs of Rome, and Constantinople is our capital. And you forget that in the later period, the two cities that became like the most important was uh, um, Constantinople and Ravenna in Italy.
Yeah.
But Constantinople
You know,
was
there's a thought because like the Romans believed themselves to be descended of Troy, and so Constantinople is basically a little bit north of Troy, and in their minds they were
yeah.
just reoccupying their former homelands.
I think Constantine was like like he was deep into like Greek law. I think
Yeah.
he was deep into Greek law, and I think he was a romanticist for Greek culture. And I think I believe he had a great love of Hellenic culture, and that's why he had. That's why I mean I know there are the historians say, oh well, it's a bit of a centric location, and the thing though is it kind of isn't though. It is like it is a very interesting place to put a capital, and I think it was. I mean, I have wondered that as well because it is just a few. It's north of Troy, it's between Ephesus and
Yeah. Which
and
to be clear, that's speculation and doesn't seem like the Romans ever say anything about it. But what are the chances they pick a capital near what they regard as their former homeland?
Yeah, I mean the arguments by modern historians is well, it's what connects Asia to Europe, the crossroads of Asia and Europe. But at the same time, that really wasn't. Uh, it wasn't like it wasn't really. I wouldn't say it was like they could have like chose like Athens as I think there are places which you could have argued are more centric to
Yeah,
the Roman world at that time.
Constantinople is not a central Greek city. It's a central Thracian city that spoke Greek. It's if you wanted to like be a Greek, you wouldn't find your capital in Constantinople. You'd found it in like Athens. The fact that he chose Constantinople suggests that he was trying to hearken home to, they didn't know where Troy was. It was only rediscovered in our time period, but they knew it was
Yeah,
somewhere there.
yeah. Did I give her Roman salutes? Yes, I do. I even give Roman salutes to women today. Um,
So anyway,
yeah,
returning to the topic, I would argue that the the Germanic pagans. So the basic argument is that Rome became Christian and became weakened. This argument doesn't work because the Romans were less Christian than the Germans that conquered them. Like the large amount of the Roman population was still pagan or some form of it, whereas the Germans were almost entirely Arian. And so that argument doesn't work because most of the Germans were more Christianized than the Romans. The argument that it was a country bumpkin insult, like paganism is a white slur or a bumpkin slur, doesn't work because the countryside of Rome is not like the English countryside. It's villas and elite, not poor, dumb people. So this argument's dumb because the villas are some of the wealthiest places in Italy with their vineyards and agricultural capital. The argument that give me some more arguments from Uber Burrows post because I'm trying to go through them now.
hold on a second. If you just keep on talking a second, I'll...
No, I mean like I can't really remember all the arguments, but like the idea that Christianity was Rome's woke movement, I actually agree with that. I'm not ashamed of saying that. The difference is that the Christian woke movement was against like some of the most brutal and degenerate forms of civilization imaginable. Like it was a woke movement against what was basically classical neoliberalism, if you will.
So actually on the topic of the sort of Byzantines, he did like a recent post. The Byzantine Empire was a fake empire that wore Rome like a skin suit. When the West fell, Rome was done. Justinian was an idiot.
So even if I agree with him that the Eastern Roman Empire was just a Greek with Roman's title, then Rome didn't fall because most of those Gothic kingdoms were just Gothic in name only and actually were just a continuation of Roman territory.
Justinian was an idiot and was controlled by his prostitute wife.
I do agree with that. Like he's not. This is the thing. Uberboro isn't often wrong. He's just purposefully misinterpreting something. So like he's not wrong to say Justinian was like a cuck, basically. He was. there's not a lot of praising history of him in the time period itself.
Like, Tiberius was controlled by his mother for a period. Caligula was controlled. Well,
Yeah.
if
So, yeah. So, like,
Caligula,
go on.
Caligula was controlled, believed by Roman sources at the time, by his sister, who he had an incestuous relationship with. I mean, I don't. I get what he means, but the thing there is, that's not like the degeneracy that he comes from. That he's sort of referencing there, like prostitute. He says like prostitute wife. I mean, you can you if you're trying to apply some sort of Christian morality on this particular subject, there's plenty of other
Yeah.
emperors
So,
beforehand.
just to go on with that, like the idea, it's true that the Greeks were a fake Roman Empire, but in the same way, the Goths were a fake Gothic Empire. If you look at the Gothic courts, they were often full of Romans and Latins. Like you had this thing called the Mayordomo, which was basically a prime ministership. It was almost always held and initially it was almost always held by Latins. So the Romans were basically helping the Germans rule their empire. And again, the Germans only constituted a few thousand people in a population of millions, and so it was still predominantly a Roman Empire. And if you read the writing, the people of this empire regarded themselves as Romans still, as you know. Like famously, they call themselves the Roman emperor, not the German emperor. These people groups appear to have regarded themselves as still being Roman, and they spoke Latin, and they were basically Romanized. In most instances, in most instances, the Roman law continued. The Justinian law took place of Julian law, but it's basically the same thing. The Roman law continued. The Roman language continued. The Roman institutions continued. It was just a German monarchy basically ruling what was fundamentally a Roman Empire. So Uberboy was right to call the Byzantines a fake Roman Empire, but he kind of has to accept the fact that the Germans were a fake Roman Empire too, and Rome didn't fall. The Western Roman Empire continued as a devolved state or coalition or confederacy of a number of peoples at the monarchy level, not at the civil level. At the civilian level, it was still basically Roman. And that's why to this day, most of those countries still speak Latin variants. Anyway, that's just a quick rant. Once again, a lot of times Uber Bro isn't wrong. He's just he's not applying the same metrics to everyone.
No,
so,
I mean,
sorry, another tangent here, but this is also why I again argue that Gothic managed Rome was superior because it displayed a number of qualitative improvements on the original Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire did not have a capacity to what would be the word? Adapt. They lost the ability to adapt. That's why they were losing the wars. They lost the ability to progress. I don't know, maybe not progress, build, basically. That's why they weren't building anything new anymore. They lost the ability to I guess trade, because the trade routes were breaking down. They needed a better management team, and that was what the Germans were at a fundamental level. They just managed Rome better. Sorry, that was a bit of a spiel.
This is a spicy one for me. Okay, but I'm going to read this anyway because this is. Let's see if we can sort of go through this. Christians treat Jews how an incel treats women. How it treats a woman.
That's not wrong.
They feel frenzied hate towards them, but also worship them as divine.
No, that's not. I don't worship them as divine. That's just neocon bullshit he's talking about.
Yeah. That's some like that's like some American evangelical. Maybe the evangelicals do.
Which he is Irish, so he only knows the worst of American religion anyway.
Okay. The Chad pagan laughs with indifference at Jews.
That's not true, because as you know, the pagans obliterated Judaism in Israel. As you know, the pagans did not ignore Israel; they burned it to the fucking ground.
Yeah, and also you actually had like after, I guess, like in the successor states of Alexander's empires, you actually had Greeks that you had like Greek Jews, you had like a
like the Jews were more pagan by the time of Christ than anything else. They were becoming Hellenized.
I mean, they were wearing you had Jews that were like wearing Greek like Greek style clothing and everything else and behaving in the sort of a Greek manner.
Yeah.
Many they actually believe that like Peter was born in a village which was predominantly Greek pagan and then you had like a few Jewish households which were Greckified, let's say.
Peter, you said?
Sorry?
Peter?
Yeah, Peter. Yeah, Peter. There was David Suchet did he went to an archaeological dig and they found what was to believe like the reason they came up with that it was you had a Greek pagans living there was you had like catfish like a catfish like industry or catfish reference to catfish and as used as a local source, but of course catfish is it's Jews can't consume it because it's as what is it? My brain's melting at the moment. I can't. What is it? Not halal, but you get the idea.
Halal?
Jews
Oh yeah,
they
halal,
can't.
halal. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, they
Brain
can't
fart.
eat. Yeah,
So
that's brain fart.
anyway, we've been going for almost 2 hours, so we should probably try to tie this up to some basic ideas.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've just seen the country bumpkin slur. I mean, so overall, I think only his argument could work in a British context with the Romano Brits, but at the same time, Rome left Britain before the arrival of the Angles and Saxons and Jutes and everything. So there wasn't really when you have like an kosher. That's it. When you didn't have so you didn't have like a Roman, like a proper Roman military or Roman political structure that existed elsewhere in the empire in the other provinces. I think overall the argument that Christianity has made men weaker is woke. I mean, first of all,
I would say again, I agree with the claim that Christianity was Rome's woke religion. The only thing is, what were they woke against? It was Rome's cringy liberalism. Like the idea that everybody had to be Rome, the idea that there was no diversity. I don't want to say diversity, but like no diversity. German lives matter, if you will.
Well, the only thing that I would say is,
German lives matter. It's just like, yeah, I mean, Germany, Rome's black people or Germans.
when you had Latin peoples in control of the Western Roman Empire, they showed they basically just used Goths to bolster up the military. And there was at no point in the Latin, the Latins didn't like formulate some sort of anti-civilizational cultural policy where they denigrate their own people, like we see today.
Well, actually, I would argue they did it with the cults, the foreign cults that they loved. They seem to have like. I want to go on a tiny rant here. In some points in history, I was saying on another stream last night that you'll sometimes see that the idea of being elite becomes associated with being foreign. A good example of that is a lot of lowland countries in Belgium during the Napoleonic Wars. Even within France itself, the idea of being anything elite, you had to first speak French and be French. Then you were elite. You couldn't do it. There was no such thing as an elite Dutch person or an elite like Al-Qatan or other groups of people. In order to be elite, you had to be a foreigner. Rome had something kind of like another example of that would be Russia loving French culture too. So in Russia, if you want to be elite, there was no such thing as a Russian elite. You had to learn French. If you were mimicking the French culture, now you were elite. You couldn't be an elite Russian, if you will. Rome
I
had
mean,
something.
I do.
Yeah, go on.
I do think though his objections is actually comes down to just pure on an ethnic basis of one ethnic group. It's just there was a point before 1945 where people in their ethnic group had immense in-group preference. When there was a point, it was normal, and I think for a lot of young men today, it's quite hard to conceptualize that there was a point where the people look back through history and say, "Oh, look at this subversive element," or "Look at that," and it's like the trouble is a lot of the hostility with people within their own in-group is only a very recent thing. It's really recent.
In the English speaking world, it's recent. It's only recent that like the idea of being English became associated with being low class, and that is very unfortunate. And it's the same problem you saw in other cultures. The main problem there isn't religion. That happens in every culture, regardless of religion. When they honestly, when they get obsessed with it, occasionally a culture will just get really obsessed with about foreign people that they aren't for whatever reason. And once that happens, go on. Sorry.
And also on the topic of the Jewish stuff, I mean, I just refer him to the Bishop Cyril of Alexandria and what he did to the Jewish population there.
Yeah, but so this is the problem with this is a big problem with pagans where they'll do a Montanelli argument where they'll be like, oh, Christianity was so intolerant to the Jews. Oh, but now it's so tolerant to the Jews, and they don't actually pick their side. They just kind of argue both sides. It is. I don't like this. This is like a kind of like low IQ argument style. But basically, like they have to pick a side. Is it wrong to be against Judaism in the classical era, or is it wrong to be for Judaism in the modern era? Like which is it? You have to pick a side. Like, are you for the evangelical view, or are you for the classic Christian view? Like, you pick a side. Stop arguing that they're both wrong.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I can't really. Either they're neocons, either the ancient Romans were neocons, or they were Wignats. So make up your mind on this issue.
And they never will, because it's a Montanelli argument where they're switching the argument halfway through. Anytime they try that, where they'll start the argument by pointing out how intolerant Christians were in the Roman era, and then how tolerant they are today, and they're trying to argue they're both wrong. Just call it what it is. The Montanelli. Like, okay, pick a side. Which ask them which side's right.
And also when they go down the line of masculine strength and everything, there is like an element of whininess from the neo-pagans and Nietzscheans that, oh well, the Christians just obliterated, they destroyed, they tore down temples, and it's like, okay, but if you want to go down the line of like pure like masculine strength, barbarian style thing, isn't that kind of like peak masculine energy though?
Yeah, like you can't have a civilization. Well, you can have a civilization that's very masculine. It's like Sparta, but Rome was also. It's one of those arguments where you also have to pick a side. What defines masculinity? Is masculinity being strong and wild, or is it being civilized and educated and ruling, basically? You have to pick a side.
Yeah, and I mean, there was definitely. I mean, the warrior spirit was a deeply individual, transcendental connection that all of them had. Whether you go back to pagan or Christians or whatever, there was definitely that. It definitely existed in them, for sure. And also, I mean, I remember I had this debate with. It was another. I can't remember who it was now, but it was over the massacre of Verdun, and he said, "Well, that was a war crime," and it's like, what the hell are you on about? Charlemagne, he saw a threat, he got rid of them, and told them to convert. What was it? A few thousand of them said no, and it's like, okay, I'm going to demonstrate for the rest of the world. This is what happens when you go against what I do. It's like, yeah, but he committed war crime. He killed innocent people, and it's like you sound like a bleeding heart liberal. You
I know, and again, this is the
it's like
this is the Mott and Bailey of arguing both sides. Oh, it's wrong to kill civilians. Oh, but it's base when it's Christians, right? It's like, okay, so pick a fucking side. Do you like Viking killing civilians, or do you like the or you don't? Like,
yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of them, like the Irish one, he likes to reference Irish legends and heroes. I mean, what do you think they were doing? I don't listen. I don't mind when I look at history, and a pagan a pagan warlord wipes out another tribe, enslaves its women and children, kills, like decapitates the men, sacrifices them to one of their gods. Cool. Okay, that makes sense from their perspective. That makes sense to do, because the thing to do is, if you allow the sons and things and the men to survive, you're just going to have potential enemies and future revolts.
in the
So
future.
yeah, so I understand that, and it's one of the reasons why Charlemagne did what he did, because he realized that because he knew the Saxons were like him, barbarian, and the only message that they would get is you're not going to revolt ever again, because I'm going to kill off your aristocracy, which is kind of what happened.
I like this is unfortunately just like war is brutal. Bad things happen in war. If you want a war, where people don't die, don't fight a war.
Because you're sounding like some like teenage like liberal discussing war and conflict. It's like I thought you're better than this. I mean, you're meant to be like based pagan, reconnecting to Hellenic period, and it's like you
want to be a Hellenist, don't want to fight like a Hellenist.
Yeah, I just don't get it, and
it's not meant to be it's kind of arguing for the sake of arguing. It doesn't actually.
Yeah, I mean, if there are plenty of points you could easily attack Christianity on. I mean, the only one that they have you could have a valid point of attacking is the fact that you could argue that religion should be connected to the ethnic group of a people. You could. That is a very strong argument. That's an argument which I respect, and that's a lot of them that especially the Nordic ones make. I think it's difficult for a lot of the the Mediterranean.
It can't be argued from a Mediterranean perspective because they didn't believe in that.
Yeah, that's the problem. It can't really be argued from that perspective, and it's too broad and too.
And I will argue that even the Norse didn't view it as like their specific religion, culture. Because again, they were raiders. They didn't give a shit about whose gods were whose. They just wanted to take things, and the gods of that were like maybe they existed in other cultures, that maybe they didn't. They seem to be very agnostic about that.
I mean, a lot of the Vikings took quite interest in the concept of Christianity because it was different. It was different.
They weren't used to it, and so it was foreign. No. And again, like the Vikings actually had something of the same problem where they knew there was no such thing as like, or they didn't think of like a Viking as being something noble born. There were noble Vikings, but like if you want to be like a noble Viking, you had to like learn Latin or Greek or some other thing.
You have to be a well-rounded person, explorer, educated. I mean, I think the sort of peak for if you were in a Norse society, and you would say, I'm going to go off to the emperor in Constantinople and join in the Varangian Guard, that would be like
you get
massive kudos, pride of the family sort of stuff.
Yeah, and you come back speaking Greek and knowing a bunch of like
and with all this money and everything, and that would be like the ultimate sort of the ultimate sort of success story. And you have to remember that the reason why Christianity spread in Denmark and Norway and in Sweden different, but was because a lot of the Vikings, they would marry Anglo-Saxon women, and they would marry Anglo-Saxon women, and then when the women would go with them to, especially the nobility, they'd bring them back to Scandinavia, and they would raise, they would be the head of the households at home, and because they were Christian, that would trickle down to the next generation. And this is the thing: Christianity is one of those. It's in many ways you could argue it's more of like an elite theory style religion, because it only works best, or it's most effective really when the elite in society, i.e., like the warlords or whatever, they convert, and then the populace usually follows soon after. Relatively speaking.
Yeah, and again, we'd also there's also the forgetting of like paternal relationships. So like people often did just convert to their lord's religion on principle.
Yeah, Kent, the kingdom of Kent is a very classic example. The king, he married a Frankish princess, and so when you had Augustine's missionary to Canterbury and then converted him, the population was kind of like, yeah, you're all Christian now, and they just went along with it. The problem that you had is when the missionaries left a kingdom like in Northumberland, that happened several times, they just would revert back to paganism because they didn't really understand. Because this is the thing, is even the kings didn't understand it really.
Actually, this is a good argument of why, even if Uber Burrow was right that the pagan bumpkins was like an insult for the lower class, very clearly the lower class didn't really understand what the fuck they were doing. Can you really call them pagan if they didn't even understand what it was?
Even the kings didn't really understand, or they just didn't really care. It was like whatever.
Yeah, more often than not, they didn't care. The English were famous for not giving a shit.
I mean, the Angles, there was, I think there was like an outbreak, and one of their kings died, and he was recently converted, and then his heir and the people thought, oh my god, it's because we have abandoned the old gods, and they just reverted back to paganism. And then like the Mercia had to come. No, it was Middlesex. It was Middlesex. A Mercian king had to come down and basically just say, wrong answer. I'm in charge now. And yeah, Northumberland, as I said, it happened several times, and it's why one of the most important Anglo-Saxon figures in Christianity, Saint Wilfrid. He actually said one of the problems was, unlike it's on the continent, churches and everything were in the middle of towns and cities. They were churches, cathedrals. They were in the center in those areas, and they were central in power and prestige. But you didn't have that in Anglo-Saxon England. You didn't have that sort of central, because it was like all monasteries, like all these Irish monasteries located out in the middle of nowhere. And so his argument was, we're going to start building churches in the middle of settlements, and it's going to be a central point, because he actually
the continent had that idea too. That's why, like, after Charlemagne, you start seeing a lot of the Latin word meaning paganus, or rural rustic territory. It started getting a lot of churches in those neighborhoods.
Yeah. And the reason why he did this was he noted there was a St. Wilfrid. He noted there was a group of monks who were stuck on this raft, and they were floating out to sea, and they had the fishermen chucking stones and laughing at them. And he asked them, why aren't you helping them? Why are you chucking stones? And they said, well, they've taken us away from our old gods, and now our fields aren't. Our fields are failing, our crops are failing, and everything else, and wife snagging at me and everything. So he realized that the problem was there wasn't a consistency and authority from the center, and that was one of the reasons why that changed, because he kind of had to basically kick the Irish out at that point.
Yeah,
he was like, okay. Because he did several missions. He was very friendly with the Bishop of Lyon, and then from there went to Rome several times. And even the Bishop of Lyon even said he was impressed by St. Wilfrid so much that he said, I want you to marry my daughter and just stay, and I can give you like a small bishopric, like in Francia somewhere.
Yeah.
Should we call it a night now? I think it's getting
we've been here for long enough. I guess final thoughts are, the rural Romans were not bumpkins. They were like plantation owners. Constantinople was the Eastern Roman Empire was indeed a Greek fake state, but then so too with the Gothics, and Rome didn't actually fall. So Rome wasn't weak; it was just adapting. The quote unquote pagans that conquered Rome, the Germans, were mostly just Arian Christians. They weren't proper pagans. So the idea that they were, somehow weaker, like who is weaker, like the fake Roman Christians, the fake German Christians, right? Like it's a nonsense argument. And essentially, Nietzscheans have to stop arguing like double falsity. I'll call it like both sides, like genocide's wrong or tolerance is wrong, or pick a side. Do you want to be a crazy raving barbarian slaughtering people, or do you want to be a civilized feminist? Pick a side.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think paganism, even in the later stage where you look at them sort of like ISIS and very obscure cults which had large followings in the Roman world. One of the things with wokeism is modern wokeism is incapable of depicting beauty and connecting to the transcendent. Okay, that's part of modernity. That's part of the secular, modern, technocratic society we live in, and it's hell. It's a living hellscape. But whether it was the mystery cults or Christianity, Gothic Christianity. I mean, some of the Gothic Christian buildings that were built in Italy, they're amazing.
Yeah, the Goths were not barbarians. They were. I find I'll say again controversially, I think the Goths were a better civilization than the Romans. I think Roman civilization became better under Gothic rule, and I think they were essentially better at the religion than better at the culture than the founding culture. Like the Goths were better Romans than Romans were, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, both the pagans and stuff were, the Christians. They were able to display beauty, even the pagans to the very end, and they weren't anti-civilizational. They're anti-transcendent in beliefs. I think just what happened is obviously a lot of these Nietzschean new pagans obviously have they draw, I think, the Protestant Reformations to liberalism, and then liberalism to
in which case just be Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think that's the sort of connection that they draw from it. But at the same time, power is absolute. And the thing though is, if we lived in a, let's just say hypothetically tomorrow we woke up and
if hypothetically
hypothetically we woke up in a regime which was not woke, wasn't anti-civilizational, and was like fascist, like just uber fascist, right? The church, whether it be the Church of England, the Catholic Church, or whatever in the West, would represent that worldview with the right elites and people. It just would represent that worldview.
Which church now?
A lot of the Christian churches are pretty like gay and woke, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is because of the technocratic managerial culture. Now, if that managerial culture was fascist, the church would represent that tomorrow. If in my view, it would represent that. If the culture was fascist, let's just say it was let's just say more not like nationalist, then the Protestant churches would be more nationalist.
I would argue political ideology doesn't matter. The church will find a way to serve and be the salt of the earth, whatever government you're under. It doesn't actually matter. Christianity isn't like for any specific kind of government. No matter how much the liberals want to tell you, like a Christian church can exist under any government because it doesn't actually give a shit. It just serves whatever you give it, and it makes it better.
I do think though that I do understand why certain emperors took steps to crush Christian heresies, because
you don't want to. That's another thing. Like, even though it can adapt to any government, you have to have a monolith. You have to have like a single form of church, otherwise you're going to have division and destruction.
I mean, I no offense, but some of like the Christian denominations in the US, some of them need to be need to be put to the sword.
In Minecraft.
In Minecraft, not in real life, of course. I support everything in the UK government and about freedom of religion, all that. So yeah, but a lot of them, there's a lot of Protestant churches, and as demonstrated by I forgot his name now, Turnip Merchant. Oh God, I forgot. So late, I can't think straight. Do you know who I'm on about? Cringe Walker, Turnip.
Yeah, Turnip Seed. Yeah, he's
yeah.
What about him?
His recent back and throw with the various Lutheran.
Yeah. Like that's a good example of how like Christianity will just serve whatever government you give it. I mean, that sounds weak. Like it doesn't actually stand for anything. It stands for a lot. It's that the government. It's actually an admission that government doesn't matter. It's the kind of people that are in the government. Like I'll give a great example of this. East Germany was fucking based. East Germany, the communist country, was based.
Yes, it was.
They had laws against sodomy. They had laws against transsexuals, all kinds of stuff. They had like
music, Western music.
Yeah, very pro. Like if you want
American music,
if you want a strong Western country, look to Eastern Germany. They're pretty awesome. And the same way there's that was the base version of Christian. That was the base version of like communist Christianity, if you will. And the cringe version is of course the corrupt version in Russia to some extent. If you want a based Christian monarch, there's plenty of examples of that. That's like the classical example. But if you want a cringe Christian monarch, well, look at your own king, my friend. But yeah, and that is to say, it's not just that it can be anything, and there is a difference. Like East Germany with its based, I'm using the word "based" really broadly, but East Germany with its based Christian communism was the most successful member of the Soviet bloc. Like it was the wealthiest, safest, happiest country in the Soviet bloc because the Christianity there was serving its people well. Russia, its church, not so much. So it's not that it's the quality. Like Christianity can adapt to any culture and government, but there is a qualitative difference on if they are following the word of God or not. If they're following the word of God, you get something like East Germany, which is kind of awesome. If they're not following the word of God, you get something kind of cringe.
No, that's right. And I also, Stalin. Remember Stalin during the Second War? He did reopen up the Orthodox churches.
Stalin rebased the Orthodox Church, if you will.
Yeah, Stalin was based, and crucial. The thing there is, I think the Soviet Union really peaked. It was peaked. Peaked under Stalin, and everything else after him was just cringe. And
anyway, this is off topic for another time. We're talking about real politic. Like obviously, Stalin was a big baddie and awful and all that, and it would have been better if it was just a monarchy. But like Stalin was a fix to a lot of the problems of Leninism. That's off topic. We'll talk about that another time.
The thing is, Stalin was a sensible centrist and wasn't ideological.
We're basically talking about like, oh, like this shit won't cause constipation. That shit will. It's still shit.
I do think like figures like Theodosius and Charlemagne and Stalin really just accepted that ideology is just like excuse for power.
Yeah, it's just like as AA says, BS, BS, BS. Therefore, we rule.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, like even the Christian bishops like Ambrose and stuff, I think even he was like, yeah, BS, BS. We love Rome. We rule. There we go. That's it.
Yeah, and again, like because pagans are going to think, oh, that makes you like watery. You could be anything. You're slippery, right?
Well, no, because you determine what's reality in that scenario anyway.
Well, I would say that the getting to power part matters less than how you manage power. And the way Christians manage power when they're faithful to the gospel, regardless of government or ethics or anything at all, is better than anything else, basically.
Yeah, Christians didn't even start to show their teeth in the Roman Empire until Theodosius, until emperors like him gave them certain laws which gave them a free pass.
Again, that was because the people were demanding it, not because they wanted to do it. The the Romans were getting kind of fed up of their own civilization's bullshit too.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean, like, this is why I explained. Like, the famous one is the death of Hypatia in
oh yeah,
Alexandria.
so we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
I don't
that
care. I don't care about Hypatia. Like,
yeah. So this is the
it's
thing.
sad. It's sad she died, but she was also probably a witch. So who cares?
There was a film in 2009 which I've seen several times, and it's okay. It is like for a bit fedora sort of film, but it's called Agora, and it's around Hypatia and her. Uh, it's a bit weird because in the film she sort of rediscovers Aristarchus' heliocentric model of the solar system, right? But to my knowledge, she had nothing to do with anything to do with the heliocentric sort of studies. She was more of a mathematician, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, she was like she's a witch. And let's be honest, Hypatia herself was like, if you know anything about Egyptian history, those motherfuckers slaughtered each other every couple of years. It didn't matter what religion they were. And in that regard, Christianity ended up bringing stability to Egypt because they were so famous for their slaughtering of each other. It's hard to describe how bad it was. Like every couple of years, a Jewish revolt would happen, a pagan revolt would happen, a Christian revolt started happening, but they weren't as bad. Like, for example, when the Jews revolted in Alexandria, they killed like over 100,000 civilians. It was insane how much they killed.
Because it was a school, it was all centered around the Serapeum, which was like a temple come school for pagans and Christians, both attend Jews. They did attend there.
Yeah, and they were very violent. I mean, when you say school, what that basically means is like debate floor. Like they debated each other in those floors.
Yeah, they did debate, and there was like a library. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, this is when the Christians destroyed Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria." It's like, no, that was during Caesar's time.
Alexander's library burned down several times, not just because of like it burned down when Caesar came, it burned down when the Crusaders came, it burned down when the Muslims came. Anyway, we're getting off topic. How do you want?
I was just saying on the final point, like, yeah, I mean, on that one, that in some ways, I don't want to say it happened organically, but it was definitely led by local. But it was definitely led by local bishops because the pagans went out and attacked Christians.
It's not really worth going who did what. Alexander is one of those cities where, after so many centuries of he said, she said, everybody's guilty.
Yeah, but yeah, so effectively what it came down to is Hypatia didn't understand elite politics and was a bit of a boomer woman when it came to like, oh, I can be a single, independent, proud woman. I can determine my own destiny. It's like, yeah, wrong century, love. So on that note, we'll call it. And thanks for coming on, Cringe Walker.
Yeah. Thank
you everyone in chat from Nathan Hood, Vulture, Rory Herbert joined as well, Crusader 21, and if I missed anyone else, I apologise. Minion as well. I think there was. The Earl of Stair. Thank you as well for watching. I'll catch you all next time. I plan to do next week. By the way, I'm going to be doing I've been doing a series, Cringe Walker, on the concept of love in mythological tales. And my next one I want to do is Beren and Luthien.
I forget that one.
That's in the it's in the Silmarillion. It's it's Luthien, the elf, like princess, and Beren, the human, and the thing that, truth be told, I don't really know the tale too well, so I've actually just started reading like a PDF extract from it. But I've also downloaded like an audio book from Christopher Tolkien, but I don't know, because some of like the comments, some of the reviews on that is like, oh, this is nothing like the Silmarillion. Oh, this is such a bastardization, and others are saying
it's his own son, for Christ's sake.
I know. Some of the Tolkien.
They're they're JAR purists. Anyway, we're gonna have a topic again. We should just
yes. So anyway,
I wanted I'll talk to you after the stream. Actually, I have a few thoughts, but
okay. I'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining. See you all next time.